A lonely black boy buys diapers every day. Alone, quiet, and far too young to bear such heavy burdens. His routine catches the attention of a skeptical officer who decides to follow him. What the officer discovers behind the doors of a crumbling house will break his heart and shatter everything he thought he knew. This boy isn't just running errands. He's fighting a battle no child should face. But why is he hiding? Who is he protecting? And when the truth comes to light, can anyone save him before it's too late? What would you do if you uncovered this heartbreaking secret? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The bell above the door chimed softly as Trey Robinson pushed open the heavy glass door of Thompson's corner store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the worn linoleum floors. His small fingers clutched a few wrinkled dollar bills, earned from helping neighbors with their yard work. Mrs. Linda Thompson looked up from her crossword puzzle, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She watched as the young boy made his way straight to the baby supplies aisle, his worn sneakers squeaking against the floor. This wasn't the first time she'd seen him here. In fact, he'd been coming in almost every other day for the past few weeks. "Evening, Trey," she called out gently. But he only gave a slight nod in response, his eyes fixed on the task at hand. Trey reached for the smallest pack of diapers, mentally calculating if he had enough money left for food. His heart sank when he realized the prices had gone up again. Moving to the canned food section, he carefully selected 3 cans of beans and a jar of baby food, his small arms struggling to hold everything. Across the street, Officer Mark Reynolds sat in his patrol car, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. The setting sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood, and his attention was drawn to the small figure in the store. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. A child that young shouldn't be shopping alone, especially not for diapers and baby supplies. Inside the store, Mrs. Thompson rang up Trey's purchases, noticing how his eyes anxiously watched the total climbing on the display. "That'll be $12.43, honey," she said softly. Trey carefully counted out his crumpled bills and loose change, relief washing over his face when he had just enough. The plastic bag was almost as big as he was, and Mrs. Thompson's heart ached as she watched him struggle to lift it. "Would you like some help carrying that, sweetheart?" "No, thank you, ma'am," Trey replied quickly, already backing toward the door. "I got it." Officer Reynolds straightened in his seat as Trey emerged from the store. The boy's head swiveled left and right, checking his surroundings before hurrying down the sidewalk. The bag swung heavily at his side, occasionally bumping against his leg as he walked. Later that evening, Mark unlocked the door to his apartment, the silence hitting him like a physical force. The day's observations of the young boy troubled him, but they were quickly overshadowed by his own personal struggles. His eyes fell on the collection of photographs on the mantelpiece, Emily's school pictures, sports team photos, and family vacation snapshots that felt like they were from another lifetime. He picked up his phone, scrolling to Emily's number. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Her recorded voice sounded happy, carefree, so different from their last conversation. "Hey, Em," he started, his voice rough. "It's Dad. He paused, running a hand over his face. "I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." Another pause. "I miss you, kiddo. Call me back when you can." Mark ended the call and sank into his worn recliner, the weight of his failed relationships pressing down on him. The image of Trey struggling with his groceries flashed through his mind, mixing with memories of Emily at that age. Something about the boy's situation nagged at his police instincts, but tonight, his own emptiness consumed his thoughts. Next day, Officer Mark Reynolds guided the patrol car through the familiar streets of the neighborhood, his partner, Officer Jessica Martinez, sitting quietly beside him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and graffiti-covered walls. "Another day in paradise," Mark muttered, gesturing toward a group of teenagers lounging on a street corner. "Same faces, same problems, different day." Jessica shook her head, her dark ponytail swaying with the motion. "You know, Mark, not everyone here is looking for trouble. Most of these people are just trying to get by." "That's what I used to think too," Mark replied, his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. 15 years on this beat has taught me different. Remember the Thompson kid last month? We tried to help him, and what happened? Right back to dealing drugs the next week. One person doesn't define an entire community, Jessica said firmly. She'd been partnered with Mark for 6 months now, and his pessimism was becoming all too familiar. As they turned onto Mason Street, Mark spotted a familiar small figure entering Patel's pharmacy. "There's that kid again," he said, slowing the car. Through the store window, they could see Trey approaching the counter with what looked like bandages and antiseptic cream. Inside the pharmacy, Mr. Raj Patel watched with concern as Trey counted out coins on the counter. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he pushed the money forward. "Are you sure you don't need help with anything?" Mr. Patel asked gently. "Perhaps I could speak with your parents?" "No, sir," Trey replied quickly, gathering his purchases. "Everything's fine." As Trey hurried out of the pharmacy, he nearly bumped into Ms. Carla Jenkins, who was entering the store. She watched him disappear down the street, then turned to Mr. Patel with worried eyes. "That's the 3rd time this week I've seen him shopping alone," she said, approaching the counter. "Yesterday he was at my store buying cleaning supplies and baby powder. Something's not right, Raj." Mark and Jessica observed as Trey hurried past their patrol car, clutching his small paper bag close to his chest. The boy's eyes darted nervously toward their vehicle before he quickened his pace. "That doesn't look right to me," Mark said, watching Trey's retreating form in the rearview mirror. 9-year-old kid buying medical and baby supplies? Where are his parents? "Maybe someone at home is sick," Jessica suggested. "He could be helping his family." Mark scoffed. "Or maybe there's something more going on. Kids his age should be playing video games and riding bikes, not running errands alone all over the neighborhood." "Not everyone has that luxury, Mark," Jessica replied softly. "Some kids have to grow up faster than others. Instead of assuming the worst, maybe we should try to understand what's really going on." "Understanding doesn't solve problems," Mark said, his voice hard with cynicism. "I've seen too many cases where we gave people the benefit of the doubt, and it only made things worse." "Or maybe," Jessica countered, "you've just stopped looking for the good in people." She paused, studying her partner's rigid profile. "When did you become so convinced that everyone's hiding something?" Mark didn't answer, but his eyes remained fixed on his side mirror, watching until Trey disappeared around a corner. The boy's furtive behavior and unusual purchases nagged at him, stirring both his suspicion and, though he wouldn't admit it, his concern. Officer Mark Reynolds parked his personal vehicle, an aging blue sedan, at a discreet distance from the grocery store where he'd first noticed Trey. It was his day off, but he couldn't shake his growing concern about the boy. The morning sun had barely risen when Trey emerged from between 2 buildings, his small backpack hanging loosely from his shoulders. Mark watched as Trey made his way down Morrison Street, keeping to the shadows of buildings. The boy moved with purpose, clearly familiar with his route. He stopped occasionally, checking his surroundings before crossing streets or turning corners. The path led them to St. Mary's Soup Kitchen, a modest brick building with steam rising from its kitchen vents. Mark observed from across the street as Trey slipped in through the side entrance. Curious, he waited a few minutes before following, making sure to remain unnoticed. Inside, the warmth of industrial cooking equipment filled the air. Sister Agnes, a petite woman with silver hair and kind eyes, stood directing volunteers as they prepared the day's meals. Trey approached her with surprising confidence. "Good morning, Sister Agnes," Trey said politely. "Do you have any extra food today?" Sister Agnes's face brightened. "Ah, Trey, always so helpful. Yes, we have quite a bit left from yesterday's dinner service. Would you like to help package some of it?" Mark watched from the doorway as Trey efficiently packed containers with leftover soup and bread. Sister Agnes beamed with pride. "Such a responsible young man," she said, patting Trey's shoulder. "Your parents must be very proud." Trey's shoulders tensed slightly, but he managed a small smile. "Yes, ma'am," he mumbled, carefully placing the containers in his backpack. After leaving the soup kitchen, Trey navigated through a maze of alleyways, skillfully avoiding areas where trouble typically brewed. Mark had to admire the boy's street smarts. He knew exactly which corners to avoid and which shortcuts to take. As Trey rounded a corner onto Maple Street, an elderly woman called out from her porch. "Trey, sweetheart, I just finished baking." Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, known throughout the neighborhood for her kindness, stood holding a paper bag. The aroma of fresh bread wafted through the air. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks," Trey said, accepting the bag with both hands. "But you don't have to." "Nonsense," she interrupted warmly. "Growing boys need good food. How's your—" She paused as Trey's expression changed. "Well, you take care now, dear." Later that afternoon, Mark sat at his desk in the precinct, scrolling through police reports and school records. Nothing. No incidents. No complaints. Not even a single disciplinary note from school. Jessica appeared beside his desk, coffee in hand. "Mark, you're here on your day off?" She glanced at his computer screen. "Still looking into that Robinson kid?" "Something's not right, Jessica," Mark insisted, rubbing his tired eyes. "He's collecting food from the soup kitchen, buying medical supplies, always alone. Where are his parents? Why isn't anyone asking questions?" Jessica perched on the edge of his desk. "Look, I understand you're concerned, but following a child around town? That could look really bad, Mark. You need to be careful here." "I know what I'm doing," Mark replied defensively. "Do you?" Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. "Because from where I'm standing, you're becoming obsessed with this boy's life. There are proper channels for this kind of concern." Mark leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty search results on his screen. The mystery of Trey Robinson only seemed to deepen with each new observation, and despite Jessica's warning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening right under everyone's noses. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Morrison Street as Trey emerged from Thompson's grocery, clutching his paper bag of supplies, his small arms wrapped tightly around the oversized package, fighting to keep everything secure. The street was unusually quiet, most folks still at work or staying inside to escape the late summer heat. Marcus Slim Johnson emerged from the alley beside the store, his tall frame casting a menacing shadow over Trey. Known throughout the neighborhood for preying on the vulnerable, Slim wore a permanent smirk that made everyone uncomfortable. "Hey, little man," Slim drawled, blocking Trey's path. "What you got in that bag?" Trey's shoulders tensed as he tried to step around the towering figure. "Nothing, just groceries." "Looks like more than nothing to me." Slim's hand shot out, grabbing Trey's shoulder. "How about you share some of that money you've been flashing around lately?" From his patrol car across the street, Officer Mark Reynolds straightened in his seat. He'd been watching Trey make his usual rounds when Slim appeared. Something about the interaction set off immediate alarm bells. "Don't touch me," Trey said firmly, trying to pull away. Slim's face darkened. With a sudden shove, he sent Trey stumbling backward. The grocery bag hit the sidewalk, its contents spilling across the concrete. Cans rolled in every direction while a package of diapers burst open, scattering its contents. Mark was out of his car in seconds, moving with purpose across the street. "Hey! Step away from the boy!" Slim's head snapped up, his expression shifting from menacing to calculating. He took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just having a friendly conversation, officer." "On your knees, hands behind your head," Mark ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. As he cuffed Slim, he kept glancing at Trey, who was frantically gathering his scattered supplies. "You okay, son?" Mark asked, maintaining his hold on Slim while trying to assess Trey's condition. "I'm fine," Trey mumbled, not meeting Mark's eyes as he shoved items back into the torn bag. Mark noticed a dark bruise peeking out from under Trey's t-shirt sleeve. It looked fresh, but not from this incident. "That's a nasty bruise you've got there. Why don't you let me take a look?" "It's nothing," Trey said quickly, pulling his sleeve down. When Mark reached toward him, Trey flinched away, clutching his recovered supplies to his chest. "Listen, I just want to help," Mark started, but before he could finish, Trey bolted. The boy disappeared down the nearest alley with remarkable speed, leaving Mark calling after him uselessly. At the station, Mark processed Slim's booking while the perpetrator lounged against the holding cell bars, that same smirk playing across his face. "You really don't get it, do you?" Slim taunted, shaking his head. "Think you know what's going on in our neighborhood? You don't know nothing." Mark slammed the booking form down harder than necessary. What's that supposed to mean? Means you cops come around here thinking you understand our business, our people. Slim's smirk widened. That kid? There's always more to the story than what you see, Officer Reynolds. Mark felt his jaw tighten as he finished the paperwork. The incident kept replaying in his mind. Trey's fear, that unexplained bruise, his desperate flight from help. Something was definitely wrong, and Mark was more determined than ever to figure out what it was. The evening settled over the neighborhood like a heavy blanket, streetlights flickering to life one by one. Officer Mark Reynolds sat in his unmarked car near Thompson's grocery, his police radio turned low. He'd changed into civilian clothes after his shift, not wanting to draw attention to himself. His hands gripped the steering wheel as he waited, thoughts drifting to the bruise he'd seen on Trey's arm. At precisely 7:15 p.m., Trey emerged from the store, struggling with another oversized bag. The boy paused, adjusting his grip on the heavy load, before starting down the street. Mark waited until Trey was half a block ahead before following on foot, keeping to the shadows. Trey's route was anything but direct. He cut through an empty parking lot, ducked behind a row of abandoned buildings, and navigated narrow passages between houses. Mark had to admire the boy's street smarts. This zigzagging path would make it nearly impossible for anyone to follow him home. The neighborhood grew increasingly run down as they moved deeper into its forgotten corners. Boarded-up windows stared like blind eyes from crumbling facades. Weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk. Mark's cop instincts told him this area wasn't on any regular patrol routes. Finally, Trey turned onto a dead-end street. The houses here were mostly abandoned, their yards overgrown with tall grass and thorny bushes. At the very end stood a small, dilapidated house with peeling yellow paint and missing shutters. Mark watched from behind a large oak tree as Trey approached the front door. The boy balanced his grocery bag precariously while fumbling with a key. The porch steps creaked ominously under his weight. After several attempts, Trey managed to unlock the door and disappear inside. Mark counted to 30 before approaching the house. A broken window on the side offered a clear view into what must have been the living room. The interior made his heart sink. Water stains marked the ceiling in ugly brown patches. The few pieces of furniture looked salvaged from curbs or dumpsters. A threadbare blanket lay folded neatly on a sagging couch, and a single lamp cast weak light across the room. Movement caught his eye as Trey entered the space. The boy set down his groceries and quickly moved to the corner where, Mark's breath caught in his throat, a wooden drawer had been converted into a makeshift crib. Inside lay a tiny infant no more than a few months old. "Hey, Elijah," Trey whispered, his voice carrying faintly through the broken window. "I got you some fresh diapers and more milk. Are you hungry?" The tenderness in Trey's voice made Mark's eyes burn. He watched as the 9-year-old efficiently changed his baby brother's diaper, his small hands gentle but sure. Trey kept up a soft stream of conversation while he worked, humming what sounded like a lullaby between words. "There you go, all clean," Trey said, carefully lifting Elijah to his shoulder. He moved to the kitchen, where he began preparing a bottle with one hand, while cradling the infant with the other. The whole time he never stopped humming that quiet tune. Mark stepped back from the window, his chest tight with emotion. His legs felt unsteady as the full weight of what he'd witnessed settled over him. Here was a child, a 9-year-old boy, acting as the sole caretaker for an infant, living in conditions that no kid should have to endure. And yet, despite everything, Trey showed more compassion and responsibility than many adults Mark knew. The officer leaned against the oak tree, running a hand over his face as he tried to process what he'd seen. Now he understood the mysterious purchases, the suspicious behavior, the desperate need for secrecy. Trey wasn't involved in anything criminal. He was simply trying to keep his family together. Back in his apartment, Mark paced the dimly lit living room. Sleep eluded him as images of Trey caring for baby Elijah played over and over in his mind. His gaze fell on a photograph of Emily at her 10th birthday party, her last celebration before the divorce. In the picture, she beamed at the camera, missing front teeth making her smile endearingly crooked. Mark hadn't been there that day. He'd been working overtime, as usual. "I'm sorry, Emily," he whispered to the empty room. More memories surfaced. Missed school plays, forgotten parent-teacher conferences, dozens of "I'm too busy" excuses. He'd always told himself he was providing for his family, but now he understood, truly understood, what his absence had cost them. Sleep came in fitful bursts, and by morning Mark had made up his mind. He arrived at the Child Protective Services office just as it opened, the fluorescent lights harsh against the institutional beige walls. The social worker, Denise Harris, looked tired but attentive as she listened to his story. 2 children, you say? Living alone? Denise typed notes into her computer, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. And you're certain there are no adults involved? Mark leaned forward in his chair. I saw it with my own eyes. The conditions they're living in. It's not safe. The house is falling apart. There's a baby involved. Denise sighed, removing her glasses to rub her eyes. Officer Reynolds, I understand your concern, but without concrete evidence or a formal complaint, our hands are tied. We need documentation, witnesses willing to testify, proof of neglect or abandonment. But they need help now, Mark insisted, his voice rising. That boy is 9 years old, taking care of an infant by himself. I hear you, Denise said softly, but we have procedures we must follow. If we move too quickly without proper documentation, we could make things worse for these children. Mark left the CPS office feeling defeated but determined. If the system couldn't help right away, he would find another way. That afternoon, he filled his car with supplies: diapers, formula, canned food, fresh fruit, and warm blankets. Under the cover of early evening, he left the items on Trey's porch, arranging them carefully by the door. This became his routine. Every few days, Mark would leave another care package. Sometimes he'd add children's books or small toys for Elijah. Each time the supplies would disappear inside, though Mark never saw Trey take them. But one evening, as Mark set down a box of groceries, a sharp voice cut through the darkness. I knew it was you. Mark straightened up slowly. Trey stood at the corner of the house, his small frame rigid with anger and fear. In the dim light, he looked even younger than 9. Why are you following me? Trey demanded. Why can't you just leave us alone? I want to help, Mark said softly, keeping his hands visible and his stance non-threatening. You and Elijah need... We don't need anything from you. Trey's voice cracked. You're going to call those people who take kids away. You're going to make them separate us. Tears welled in his eyes, but his glare remained fierce. I won't let you. Elijah's all I got left. You can't take him from me. The raw pain in Trey's voice hit Mark like a physical blow. He took a step forward, but Trey backed away instantly. Stay away from us, Trey warned, his small hands balled into fists. Just stay away. He disappeared around the corner of the house, leaving Mark standing alone on the porch, surrounded by his well-intentioned offerings. The morning after their confrontation, Trey watched through a crack in the curtains as Officer Reynolds drove past his house. His heart pounded against his ribs until the patrol car disappeared around the corner. Clutching Elijah close to his chest, he whispered, Don't worry, little brother. I won't let anyone separate us. Over the next few days, Trey changed his entire routine. He visited different stores at different times, always looking over his shoulder. Instead of taking his usual route home, he zigzagged through alleyways and backyards, making sure no one followed him. The constant vigilance left him exhausted, but fear kept him alert. Mark noticed Trey's absence from his usual spots and felt a deep ache in his chest. He understood the boy's fear all too well. It reminded him of how Emily had withdrawn after the divorce, building walls to protect herself from more hurt. He couldn't force Trey to trust him, but maybe someone else could help bridge the gap. At the soup kitchen, Sister Agnes was organizing donations when Mark approached her. The elderly nun's kind face creased with concern as he explained the situation. That poor child, she said softly, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. I've noticed how thin he's become lately, and always so polite, but so distant. I want to help him, Mark said, running a hand through his graying hair. But every time I try, he pulls away. He thinks I'm going to separate him from his brother. Sister Agnes nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the hardest part of helping others is earning their trust. Let me speak with him. The next day, Trey came to the soup kitchen as usual. Sister Agnes watched as he carefully packed leftover bread and soup into his containers. When he finished, she gestured for him to sit at one of the empty tables. "You know, Trey," she began, her voice gentle, "I've been thinking about my own brother lately. We grew up very poor, and times were hard. But we made it through because people helped us. Neighbors, church members, even strangers sometimes." Trey's shoulders tensed, but he didn't leave. His fingers traced patterns on the worn tabletop as Sister Agnes continued. "There was this one family, the Martinezes, who used to bring us dinner every Sunday. My mother was too proud to accept at first, but eventually she understood that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you part of a community." From his position near the kitchen door, Mark watched their interaction. He saw how Trey's posture gradually relaxed as Sister Agnes shared more stories, though the wariness never completely left the boy's eyes. That evening, dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them sheets of rain and crackling thunder. Inside the old house, Trey hurried to place buckets and pots under the worst leaks in the ceiling. Water dripped steadily, forming puddles on the worn floorboards. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Elijah wake up crying. Trey rushed to the makeshift crib, lifting his brother into his arms. "Shh, it's okay," he soothed, but his own voice trembled as he watched more water seep through new cracks in the ceiling. The storm intensified, and so did the leaks. Water began streaming down the walls, and the floor beneath Trey's feet felt increasingly unstable. Elijah continued crying, his tiny body shivering despite the blankets wrapped around him. Trey thought about Sister Agnes's words from earlier that day, about community, about accepting help. He looked down at Elijah's tear-stained face and felt his resolve beginning to crack, just like the ceiling above them. Thunder crashed overhead as another stream of water burst through the ceiling. Trey watched in horror as the puddles grew larger, creeping closer to Elijah's makeshift crib. His brother's cries had become weaker over the past hour, and his skin felt hot to the touch despite the dampness in the air. With trembling hands, Trey pulled out the crumpled business card Sister Agnes had given him. The ink was slightly smeared, but Officer Reynolds' number was still readable. Taking a deep breath, Trey dialed the number on his old flip phone. Mark answered on the first ring. "Officer Reynolds here." It's Trey," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I need help. The roof is falling apart, and Elijah—" His voice cracked. "Please." "I'm on my way. Stay where you are." Mark's voice was firm but gentle. Within minutes, Mark's patrol car pulled up outside. He rushed through the rain carrying tarps, wooden boards, and tools. When he entered the house, he stopped short, taking in the scene. Water streaming down walls, buckets overflowing, and Trey holding a whimpering Elijah. "Let's secure the roof first," Mark said, already moving toward the worst leaks. Together they worked quickly, Mark showing Trey how to position the tarps and nail boards over the largest holes. The boy's small hands proved surprisingly steady as he helped hammer nails into place. But even as they worked, Elijah's cries grew more distressed. Trey kept glancing anxiously at his brother, his face etched with worry. "He's been sick," Trey finally admitted, his shoulders slumping. "He won't eat much, and he's so hot." Tears mixed with the rainwater on his cheeks. "I tried giving him medicine, but nothing helps." Mark knelt beside the crib, gently touching Elijah's forehead. The baby was burning up. "He needs a doctor, Trey. We have to take him to the hospital." "No." Trey stepped between Mark and the crib. "They'll take him away. They'll separate us." "Listen to me," Mark said, meeting Trey's frightened eyes. "I promise I won't let that happen. I'll stay with you both. But right now, your brother needs medical help. You've done an amazing job taking care of him, but you don't have to do this alone anymore." Trey looked at Elijah, then back at Mark. The sincerity in the officer's eyes made something shift inside him. Slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "But you have to stay with us. Promise?" "I promise," Mark said firmly. "Let's wrap him up warm and dry. My car's right outside." Together, they bundled Elijah in clean blankets. Mark led them through the storm to his patrol car, shielding them with his jacket. As they pulled away from the house, Trey held his brother close, finally allowing himself to accept help from someone else. In the stark fluorescent lights of the emergency room, Dr. Samantha Lewis listened intently to Elijah's breathing through her stethoscope. Trey stood nearby, his hands twisting the hem of his wet shirt, while Mark remained a steady presence beside him. "It's pneumonia," Dr. Lewis announced, her kind eyes meeting Trey's worried gaze. "You did the right thing bringing him in tonight. Any longer, and it could have been much worse." Trey's shoulders sagged with relief, but his moment of peace was short-lived. A nurse approached with a clipboard, asking questions that made his stomach twist. "Who is the legal guardian? Where are the parents? Do you have insurance information?" Before Trey could stammer out an answer, the hospital room door opened. Denise Harris walked in, her familiar face causing Mark to straighten up. "Officer Reynolds," she said, nodding in recognition. "I was called when the hospital couldn't verify guardianship." She turned to Trey, her voice gentle but professional. "Hello, Trey. I'm here to help sort this out." Trey backed away until he bumped into Mark. "No, please. I'm taking good care of Elijah. You can't take him." "I need to speak with Officer Reynolds privately," Denise said, gesturing toward the hallway. Outside the room, Denise's expression was grim. "You know I have to report this. These boys are living alone in dangerous conditions. Protocol requires immediate placement in foster care, and given their age difference..." She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "You can't separate them," Mark argued, his voice tight with emotion. "That boy has been everything to his brother, parent, protector, caregiver. Splitting them up would destroy them both." "I sympathize, Mark, I do. But my hands are tied. Without a suitable guardian..." Back in the room, they could hear Trey's muffled sobs. "Please, Officer Reynolds. You promised. Don't let them take him away from me." Mark ran a hand over his face, years of cynicism warring with his growing attachment to these boys. There has to be another way. The morning sun cast long shadows across Mark's desk as he pored over records, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Empty coffee cups littered his workspace, testament to his overnight search through family records and criminal databases. His persistence finally paid off when a name caught his attention. Darius Robinson. "Got you," Mark muttered, scanning the file. Darius had a record, mostly petty crimes from years ago, but nothing recent. His last known address led to an auto repair shop on the city's outskirts. The drive to Robinson's auto repair took Mark through industrial areas he rarely patrolled. The shop itself was modest, but well-maintained, with fresh paint and organized tool racks visible through the open garage doors. Inside, the steady clang of metal on metal echoed off concrete walls. A tall man in oil-stained coveralls straightened up from under a car's hood, wiping his hands on a red shop rag, his wary eyes fixed on Mark's uniform. "Darius Robinson?" Mark asked, keeping his voice neutral. "That's me." Darius's shoulders tensed. "Something wrong, officer?" "I'm here about your nephews, Trey and Elijah." The shop rag twisted in Darius's hands. "I haven't seen those boys in years. Their parents made it clear they didn't want me around." "Those boys need you now," Mark said. "They're alone. Trey's been caring for his baby brother by himself." Darius turned away, his jaw clenched. "Alone? Where are their parents?" "Deported. Trey's been trying to keep it secret, afraid they'll be separated by the system." Mark stepped closer. "Elijah's in the hospital with pneumonia. Without a guardian, they'll end up in different foster homes." "Look," Darius said, his voice rough. "I'm not exactly guardian material. Got a record that proves it. Those boys deserve better than an ex-con uncle who can't even keep his own life straight." "That record's old," Mark countered. "I see a man who built his own business, who stayed clean. People change, Mr. Robinson. I've learned that recently myself." Darius ran a hand over his face, leaving a smudge of grease. "You don't understand. I let them down before. Their parents, my sister, they were right to keep me away. I was trouble." "Was," Mark emphasized. "Right now, those boys don't need perfect. They need family. Someone who cares enough to try." "And what if I fail them again?" Darius's voice cracked slightly. "Then you get up and try harder," Mark said firmly. "But failing to try at all? That's the real failure those boys can't afford right now." Silence filled the garage. broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the tick of cooling engines. Darius stared at the family photo on his workbench, faded and worn around the edges, showing happier times before mistakes were made. "They probably don't even remember me," Darius said softly. "Maybe not," Mark agreed. "But they need you to remember them, to step up now when it matters most." In the sterile hospital room, Trey sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair next to Elijah's crib, his small hand reaching through the bars to hold his baby brother's tiny fingers. The steady beep of monitors filled the quiet space. Elijah's breathing had improved with treatment, but dark circles under Trey's eyes revealed his constant vigil. The click of heels against linoleum announced Denise Harris's arrival. Her face wore the practiced, neutral expression of someone about to deliver difficult news. "Trey," she said softly, "we need to talk about what happens next. I've found a wonderful foster family who can take Elijah while we arrange—" "No," Trey interrupted, his voice cracking. "You can't separate us. He needs me." "I understand this is hard," Denise continued, her tone gentle but firm. "But you're both minors, and we need to ensure proper care. The Petersons are experienced foster parents who—" Trey didn't wait to hear more. He bolted from the room, his sneakers squeaking against the floor as he ran blindly through the hospital corridors. Tears blurred his vision as he pushed through random doors, finally stumbling into the quiet sanctuary of the hospital chapel. The small room was empty, lit only by soft overhead lights and flickering candles. Trey collapsed into a back pew, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. All the strength he'd shown over the past months crumbled as the weight of his situation crashed down on him. "Oh, child," a familiar voice spoke softly. Sister Agnes moved quietly down the aisle, her practical shoes making no sound on the carpeted floor. She sat beside Trey, not touching him, but close enough to offer comfort. "They want to take him away," Trey choked out between sobs. "Elijah's all I have left. I've tried so hard to take care of him." Sister Agnes pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket and offered it to him. "You've done more than anyone should expect from a child your age. You've shown incredible love and strength." "But it wasn't enough," Trey whispered, wiping his eyes. "Now they'll split us up and he'll forget me and—" "Have faith, Trey," Sister Agnes interrupted gently. "Sometimes help comes in unexpected ways. God doesn't abandon his children even when the path seems darkest." Trey looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "How can you be sure?" "Because I've seen it happen time and time again," she said, smiling warmly. "Help is often closer than we think, sometimes just waiting for the right moment to appear." Meanwhile, across town in Darius's small apartment above his auto shop, Mark sat on a worn couch, telling Darius about the boys. "You should see how Trey handles everything," Mark said, shaking his head in amazement. 9 years old, and he's figured out how to budget for diapers, formula, and food. He volunteers at the soup kitchen just to bring home extra meals. He even found an old parenting book at the library to learn how to care for a baby. Darius stood by his window, staring at the family photo in his hands. "Sounds like he's got more responsibility than most adults I know." "He's an incredible kid," Mark agreed, "but he shouldn't have to do it alone anymore." Darius was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Let's go. Before I lose my nerve." They headed down to Mark's patrol car, Darius fidgeting with his clean work shirt. As they pulled away from the curb, his hands clenched nervously in his lap. "What if they don't want anything to do with me?" he asked quietly. "They need family," Mark replied. "And you're stepping up when it matters most. That counts for something." Next day, when Trey returned to Elijah's room, his feet dragging with exhaustion, he stopped short in the doorway. 2 men stood beside his brother's crib, Officer Reynolds and a stranger in clean work clothes who looked strangely familiar. The unknown man turned and Trey's breath caught. He recognized that face from the old family photo album he'd saved from their house, younger in the pictures, but unmistakable. "Trey," the man said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your Uncle Darius. I should have been here sooner." Trey stood frozen, his mind racing. He remembered snippets of conversations, whispered arguments between his parents about Uncle Darius and his troubles with the law. "Why are you here now?" Trey asked, his voice small but steady. "Because you and Elijah need family," Darius replied, taking a tentative step forward. "And I want to make up for lost time, if you'll let me." The click of heels announced Denise Harris's arrival. She took in the scene with practiced eyes as Mark stepped forward. "Ms. Harris," Mark said, "I'd like to propose that Darius Robinson be considered for temporary custody of his nephews." Denise's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Robinson has a record." "From years ago," Mark interrupted. "He's changed. He runs his own business now, has a stable home." "I know I've made mistakes," Darius added, "but these boys are my family. I want to do right by them." Denise considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll need to conduct a thorough home evaluation and background check. Time is critical here. We'll schedule it for tomorrow morning." Over the next few days, Mark spent his off hours helping Darius prepare his apartment above the auto shop. They scrubbed walls, installed safety locks, and reorganized furniture to create a proper bedroom for the boys. "Never thought I'd have a cop helping me clean my place," Darius joked as they assembled a crib. "Never thought I'd be building baby furniture with an ex-con," Mark replied with a smile. "Life's funny that way." As they worked, Darius shared stories about his past, the poor choices, the consequences, and his long journey to turn his life around. "I didn't want to bring shame to the family," he admitted. "Thought staying away was better." Trey, who visited whenever hospital staff allowed, watched their efforts with growing interest. He noticed how carefully Darius labeled baby supplies and studied parenting books during breaks. "You're really serious about this?" Trey asked one afternoon, helping Darius organize baby clothes. "More serious than I've ever been about anything," Darius replied, meeting his nephew's eyes. "I know it won't be easy, but I want us to be a family." For the first time in months, Trey felt a small spark of hope bloom in his chest. The morning of the home evaluation arrived with a crisp autumn chill. Denise Harris moved through Darius's apartment with methodical precision, her pen scratching against her clipboard as she made notes. Her eyes lingered on the freshly painted walls, the neatly arranged furniture, and the newly installed safety features. "You've clearly put in effort," she acknowledged, pausing by the small bedroom prepared for the boys. "But I have concerns about the space. It's quite compact for 2 growing children." Darius's shoulders tensed. "I know it's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. I can make it work." "And your criminal record," Denise continued, her voice gentle but firm. "It raises significant red flags in cases like this." Mark, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "What if we could provide evidence of Darius's rehabilitation? Character references? Proof of employment stability?" Denise considered this. "That would help, but it would need to be substantial." "My boss, Mr. Green, he's known me for 5 years," Darius said quickly. "He's seen how hard I've worked to turn my life around." Later that afternoon at the auto repair shop, Mr. Thomas Green listened intently to their request. His weathered face broke into a warm smile. "Darius is one of the finest mechanics I've ever employed," he said, reaching for his letterhead. "More than that, he's shown real character. Never missed a day, always honest with customers. I'd trust him with my own kids." While the adults worked on gathering documentation, Trey visited Darius at the apartment. They sat at the small kitchen table, sharing sandwiches and hesitant conversation. "Dad used to talk about you sometimes," Trey said softly. "Said you were really good with cars." Darius's eyes grew misty. "Your dad and we were close once before I messed up." "I'm scared," Trey admitted, staring at his plate. "What if they don't let us stay with you?" Darius reached across the table, gently placing his hand on Trey's shoulder. "Listen to me, Trey, I'm not giving up. Whatever it takes, whatever I need to prove, I'm going to fight for you and Elijah. We're family, and family sticks together." The sincerity in his uncle's voice made Trey's eyes water. For the first time since his parents had been taken away, he felt like someone truly understood what he'd been trying to protect, the bonds of family that held him and Elijah together. Meanwhile, Mark sat nervously at the corner cafe, his coffee growing cold as he waited for Emily. When she walked in, his heart skipped a beat. His daughter had grown so much in the months since he'd last seen her. "Hi, Dad," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Emily, thank you for coming." His voice cracked slightly with emotion. They sat in awkward silence until Emily spoke. "Mom said you've been helping some kids in trouble." Mark nodded, grateful for the opening. "A boy named Trey and his baby brother. It's made me think about a lot of things. About being there for family." Emily's fingers tightened around her cup. "Like you weren't there for me after the divorce?" The words hit Mark like a physical blow. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I got lost in my own pain and forgot about yours. I was wrong." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Do you know how many times I needed you? How many times I waited for you to call?" "I failed you," Mark admitted, his voice thick with regret. "Working with Trey, seeing how hard he fights to keep his family together, it's opened my eyes to what really matters." Emily wiped her eyes. "Tell me about him." As Mark shared Trey's story, Emily's expression softened. She told him about her volunteer work at the community center, tutoring kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. "Maybe," Mark hesitated, then continued, "maybe you could help Trey with his schoolwork? He's missed a lot, trying to care for his brother." Emily considered this. "I'd like that, to help him, I mean." At the hospital, Dr. Lewis checked Elijah's vital signs and smiled. "The antibiotics have done their job. His breathing is much better." Trey beamed, holding his brother's tiny hand while Darius watched from nearby. "We can discharge him tomorrow," Dr. Lewis continued, "as long as you follow the medication schedule." And Denise Harris, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "That's wonderful news. But remember, the custody hearing is next week. We need to have everything in order." "We're working on it," Darius assured her, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. "I'd like you to meet someone," Mark said, addressing Trey. "My daughter Emily. She helps kids with their studies at the community center, and she'd love to work with you." Trey looked uncertain but nodded slowly. "Okay," he said quietly, still holding Elijah's hand. They arranged for Emily to visit the following day, marking another step toward building a stronger support system for the boys. The following day, Emily arrived at the hospital carrying a backpack full of textbooks and art supplies. Her father had told her about Trey's love for drawing, so she made sure to bring extra sketching paper. When she entered Elijah's room, she found Trey sitting by his brother's crib, doodling on a crumpled piece of paper. "Hi, Trey. I'm Emily," she said softly, setting down her bag. Trey looked up cautiously. "You're Officer Reynolds' daughter?" Emily nodded and pulled out her sketchbook. "Dad mentioned you like to draw. Want to see some of my sketches?" Trey's eyes lit up as Emily shared her artwork. Soon they were both drawing together, with Emily showing him different shading techniques. As they worked, Emily gently introduced some math problems, relating them to art concepts like proportion and scale. "You're really good at this," Emily said, watching Trey solve an equation. "Just needs a little practice to catch up." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Slim Johnson walked out of the jail, his face twisted with anger. He hadn't forgotten how Officer Reynolds had arrested him, or how that kid Trey had been involved. Walking through the neighborhood, Slim started whispering to anyone who would listen. "You heard about that Robinson guy trying to get custody," he'd say. "Used to run with a rough crowd. Did time too. Now he wants to raise kids?" Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. When Mark heard about Slim's activities, he drove straight to Darius's auto shop. "Slim's been released," Mark told Darius, who was working under a car. "He's spreading stories about your past." Darius slid out from under the vehicle, wiping grease from his hands. "I knew this might happen. My past isn't exactly a secret." "Are you worried about the custody hearing?" "Every day," Darius admitted, his voice heavy. "But I'm not letting Slim or anyone else stop me from helping those boys." Mark nodded, respecting Darius's determination. "We need to get ahead of this. The community knows you now, the man you've become, not who you were. Let's get them to speak up." "Mr. Green already said he'd help," Darius said, referring to his employer. "Sister Agnes too. But will it be enough?" "We'll make it enough," Mark assured him. "Those boys need you, and you've earned this second chance." Back at the hospital, Emily and Trey continued their study session, now working on a creative writing assignment. Trey was sharing a story he'd made up about a brave kid protecting his little brother from monsters, not realizing how much it revealed about his own life. Emily listened intently, her heart aching for the young boy who'd had to grow up too fast. She understood what it felt like to lose a normal childhood, though in a different way. As they worked together, she saw the same determination in Trey that she recognized in herself, the drive to make things better, no matter what. Over the next few days, Mark and Darius walked through the neighborhood, visiting familiar faces who had watched Trey's struggles from afar. Their first stop was Mrs. Evelyn Brooks's small house with its well-tended garden. "That boy needs stability," Mrs. Brooks said firmly, settling into her armchair. "And I've seen how you've changed, Darius. The way you keep your head down, work hard." She picked up her pen with slightly shaky hands and began writing her letter of support. Sister Agnes welcomed them warmly at the soup kitchen. "The Lord believes in second chances," she said, squeezing Darius's hand. "And so do I. You've proven yourself worthy of one." At his convenience store, Mr. Raj Patel didn't hesitate. "I see everything from behind this counter," he explained while crafting his letter. "I watched Trey struggling alone for months, but I also saw you, Darius, coming in every morning for years, always honest, always respectful. That's the real measure of a man. I didn't know you were related." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Trey and Emily sat together by Elijah's crib, their textbooks temporarily forgotten. "Sometimes I wake up scared," Trey admitted quietly, watching his sleeping brother, "thinking they'll take him away." Emily moved closer, her voice gentle. "I understand being scared about family stuff. When my parents split up, I was terrified of losing my dad completely." "But he's trying now, right?" Trey asked. "Yeah, he is. Just like your uncle's trying for you and Elijah." Emily smiled softly. "Sometimes people surprise you." That evening, as Mark left Darius's apartment building after reviewing their collected letters, movement in the shadows caught his attention. He recognized Slim's lanky figure lurking near a parked car, accompanied by two other men. They were watching the building intently, speaking in low voices. Mark's jaw tightened as he observed them from his car. He knew that look, the calculated surveillance of people planning trouble. Instead of driving away, he parked where he could keep an eye on both Darius's apartment and Slim's group, settling in for a long night of vigilance. The street lights cast long shadows as Slim and his associates continued their surveillance, unaware they were being watched themselves. Mark pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his partner, Jessica, requesting backup patrols in the area. He wasn't about to let anyone sabotage the progress they'd made, especially not now when they were so close to giving Trey and Elijah the stable home they deserved. The night was unusually quiet when Slim and his two associates approached Darius's apartment building. They waited in the shadows until they saw Darius leave with Trey and Elijah for their evening visit to the park. Slim pulled out a set of lock-picking tools, his hand steady as he worked on the door. "Make it quick," one of his associates whispered, keeping watch. Inside the modest apartment, Slim moved purposefully, pulling out a small bag of illegal substances from his jacket. He planted them behind some books on a shelf, then scattered a few more items in strategic locations around the apartment. "This'll teach that cop and his new friend," Slim muttered, a cruel smile playing on his face. Later that evening, Darius returned home with the boys, completely unaware of what awaited them. Trey carried a sleeping Elijah while Darius unlocked the door, all of them tired but happy after their time at the park. The next morning, heavy knocks echoed through the apartment. Before Darius could fully open the door, several police officers burst in, warrant in hand. "We received an anonymous tip," one officer announced, already spreading out to search the apartment. Trey clutched Elijah tightly, his eyes wide with fear as the officers moved through their home. When they found the planted drugs, Darius's face fell in shock and confusion. "Those aren't mine," he protested as they handcuffed him. "I don't know where they came from." Trey watched in horror as his uncle was led away. "Uncle Darius!" he cried out, but the officers kept them separated. Mark arrived just as they were loading Darius into a patrol car, He took in the scene: Trey's tear-stained face, Elijah's frightened cries, and the triumphant looks of the arresting officers. "This isn't right," Mark muttered, his mind already connecting the dots. He drove straight to Slim's usual hangout spot, finding him lounging outside a corner store. "Pretty convenient timing on that anonymous tip," Mark said, approaching Slim. Slim's face remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Don't know what you're talking about, officer. But seems like some people just can't stay clean, right?" Mark leaned in close. "I know you did this, Slim, and I'm going to prove it." Back at the precinct, Mark found Jessica at her desk. "I need your help," he said urgently. "We need to check every security camera in a 3-block radius around Darius's apartment." Jessica nodded, already pulling up the footage. If Slim did this, he had to leave some trace. They began their meticulous review of the previous night's footage, determined to uncover the truth before Darius's custody hearing could be derailed. Mark and Jessica hunched over the precinct's computer screens, their eyes straining as they reviewed hours of security footage. Empty coffee cups littered their desks, testament to their determination. Finally, at 3 a.m., Jessica's tired voice cut through the silence. "Mark, look at this." She pointed to grainy footage from Mr. Raj Patel's store camera. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. on the night in question. 3 figures moved through the frame. Slim's distinctive walk was unmistakable as he and his associates approached Darius's building. "We've got him," Mark said, leaning closer. "Can you enhance this?" They spent the next hour cleaning up the footage, making it clear enough to identify Slim and track his movements. Mr. Raj Patel arrived early the next morning with additional footage from his store's back camera, showing Slim leaving the building 40 minutes later. "This is good police work," Captain Harold Simmons said, reviewing their evidence. The captain's weathered face was serious as he studied the footage. "Get me a warrant. We're bringing him in." Within hours, officers surrounded Slim's usual hangout spot. He tried to run but didn't make it far. In the interrogation room, Slim maintained his cocky demeanor until Mark laid out the evidence piece by piece. "We have you on camera, Slim," Mark said, sliding photos across the table. "We know exactly when you entered and left. Want to tell me what you were doing there?" Slim's confidence cracked. Under the weight of the evidence and facing serious charges, he confessed to planting the drugs. "That cop-loving uncle needed to learn his place," Slim spat. "Acting like he's better than everyone else now." The confession was recorded and processed. Within hours, Darius was released from custody. He emerged from the holding cell looking tired but relieved, immediately asking about Trey and Elijah. "They're safe," Mark assured him. "Sister Agnes is watching them at the community center." But their relief was short-lived. The next morning, Denise Harris called an urgent meeting. Her face was grave as she explained the situation. "The arrest record exists now, even though the charges were dropped. The court takes these things seriously, especially in custody cases." "But he was framed," Mark protested. "We have proof." "I understand that," Denise said gently. "But we need to be realistic about how this looks. The judge might question the stability of the home environment." Darius sat quietly, his hands clasped tightly. "So what do we do?" The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks organized a petition drive. Mr. Raj Patel offered to testify about Darius's character and the surveillance footage. Sister Agnes rallied her church congregation to write letters of support. "We're not letting this stop us," Mark declared, watching community members stream into the community center with letters and signatures. "If anything, this shows how much support you have." Darius watched in amazement as neighbors he barely knew came forward to help. Even his employer, Mr. Thomas Green, arrived with payroll records showing Darius's steady employment and recent promotion. "The court needs to see that one incident, especially a manufactured one, doesn't define who you are," Jessica said, helping to organize the growing pile of testimonials. Mark noticed Darius blinking back tears as he looked at the crowd of supporters. "I never thought," Darius started, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what community looks like," Mark said quietly. "Now let's make sure the judge sees it too." The weight of the upcoming custody hearing pressed heavily on Darius Robinson's shoulders as he sat in attorney Lisa Monroe's downtown office. The small conference room felt stuffy, despite the gentle hum of air conditioning. Mark Reynolds had found Lisa through his police connections, and her reputation for fighting for families preceded her. "Your case has merit," Lisa said, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses as she reviewed their documents. "But we need to address your past head-on and show the judge how much you've changed." Darius nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've worked hard to turn my life around. I just never thought I'd need to prove it like this." Meanwhile, Emily Reynolds transformed the community church hall into a gathering space. She moved between folding chairs, setting up a microphone system as community members filtered in. Sister Agnes arrived early, her kind face beaming as she helped arrange refreshments. "The judge needs to hear our voices," Emily explained to the growing crowd. "Every story about Darius matters." One by one, neighbors stepped forward to share their experiences. Mr. Raj Patel spoke about Darius's daily coffee visits and how he always helped elderly customers carry their groceries. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks recalled how Darius had fixed her car for free when she couldn't afford repairs. In a quiet corner of the hospital waiting room, Trey sat cross-legged with his scrapbook spread before him. His small hands carefully arranged photos and drawings, pictures of Elijah sleeping, sketches of their new room at Uncle Darius's apartment, and carefully written stories about their daily life together. "This is beautiful, Trey," Emily said, sitting beside him. "The judge will see how much you all mean to each other." Mark watched his daughter interact with Trey, his heart swelling with pride. She had thrown herself into helping this family with such dedication. During a quiet moment, Emily turned to her father. "Dad," she said softly, "what you're doing for them, it's really amazing." Mark squeezed her hand, grateful for this moment of connection. "I'm learning from you too, sweetheart, about not giving up on family." Back in Lisa's office, she spread out their growing collection of evidence, employment records, character references, and documentation of Darius's community service. "We're building a strong case," she assured them. "The recent incident with Slim actually helps us show how the community rallies around you." Darius picked up one of Trey's drawings from the pile, a crayon illustration of himself, Trey, and Elijah together under a bright yellow sun. His vision blurred with tears as he realized how many people were fighting to keep their small family together. The news about Michael and Angela Robinson's deportation proceedings hit like a thunderbolt on an already stormy situation. Mark Reynolds paced in his apartment, phone in hand, before finally dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "Sarah, it's Mark. I need your help with something important." Sarah Reynolds, despite their difficult divorce, listened intently as Mark explained the situation. Her professional demeanor softened when he described Trey's and Elijah's circumstances. "Send me the case details," she said. "I'll see what I can do." When Darius broke the news to Trey about his parents, the boy's face crumpled. They sat together on the worn couch in Darius's apartment, Elijah sleeping peacefully nearby. Are they never coming back?" Trey's voice trembled. Darius pulled his nephew close. "We're going to fight for them, buddy. Mark knows a lawyer who might be able to help." The next day, they visited Sarah's downtown office. She wore a crisp navy suit and spoke in gentle tones as she explained the situation to Trey. "Your words could make a difference," Sarah explained, leaning forward in her chair. "The judge needs to hear how this affects you and Elijah." While hope bloomed in one corner of the neighborhood, darkness lurked in another. Marcus Slim Johnson, nursing his wounded pride, began whispering poisonous words about Darius to anyone who would listen. "You know he's still dealing drugs," Slim told a group outside the corner store. "Just hiding it better now." Word reached Mark through Officer Jessica Martinez during their patrol. "We need to shut this down," Jessica said, her jaw set with determination. They found Slim lounging near the basketball courts, a smirk playing on his face when he saw them approach. "This stops now," Mark said firmly while Jessica stood beside him, arms crossed. "Unless you want to face harassment charges on top of everything else." Slim's smirk faltered. "You can't prove nothing." "Try us," Jessica replied coldly. Despite Slim's attempts to sow discord, the community remained steadfast in their support. When Mrs. Evelyn Brooks heard the rumors, she simply increased her visits to Darius's auto shop, bringing homemade cookies and making sure other customers saw her trust in him. Sister Agnes organized prayer circles, and Mr. Raj Patel displayed a hand-drawn sign in his store window. "We stand with Darius." In Sarah's office, Trey carefully wrote out his statement, describing his love for his parents and his gratitude for Uncle Darius. His small hand trembled as he wrote, but his words were clear and strong. In the community center's meeting room, attorney Lisa Monroe arranged chairs to simulate a courtroom setting. Darius Robinson sat stiffly in a folding chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his worried face. "Remember," Lisa said, adjusting her reading glasses, "the judge will be looking for sincerity and stability. We need to address your past head-on while emphasizing your growth." Emily Reynolds, dressed in a borrowed blazer from her father's closet, stood before Darius with a stern expression that seemed out of place on her young face. "Mr. Robinson," she began, channeling the prosecutor's role, "can you explain to the court why you believe you're qualified to care for 2 minor children, given your criminal record?" Darius shifted uncomfortably. "I made mistakes when I was younger, but I've worked hard to change. I've held the same job at Green's Auto Shop for 5 years now, and—" "Be more specific about the changes," Lisa interrupted gently. "Show them your journey." Taking a deep breath, Darius started again. "After my release, I completed rehabilitation programs and anger management courses. I've maintained steady employment, volunteered at the community center, and built a support network. These boys are my family, and they've helped me understand what really matters in life." As the mock trial continued, Emily pressed harder. "How can we be certain you won't relapse into criminal behavior?" "Because I have too much to lose now," Darius answered, his voice growing stronger. "Trey and Elijah need stability and love. I wake up every morning thinking about their future, not my past." Across town in her law office, Sarah Reynolds pored over immigration documents, her desk lamp casting a warm glow over scattered papers. Her eyes widened as she discovered a crucial detail. During Michael and Angela Robinson's initial deportation hearing, they hadn't been provided with a qualified interpreter, violating due process requirements. "This could be our opening," she muttered, quickly drafting a motion to reopen the case. Meanwhile, the community center buzzed with activity as volunteers decorated for the talent show fundraiser. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling, and hand-painted signs advertised various performances. In a quiet corner, Trey Robinson sat with Emily, working on his spoken word piece. "What if I forget the words?" Trey whispered, clutching his notebook. Emily squeezed his shoulder. "Just speak from your heart. Tell them about your family, about hope." When Trey's turn came, he walked onto the makeshift stage, his small frame illuminated by spotlights. The room fell silent as he began. "My brother's first steps were taken in shadows, but his smile lights up our darkest days. Uncle Darius says family never fades, even when some pieces seem far away." His voice grew stronger with each verse, painting pictures of late-night feedings, of Darius learning to make formula, of community members leaving groceries on their doorstep. In the audience, Sister Agnes dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Mr. Raj Patel nodded encouragingly. Darius watched from the back of the room, tears streaming down his face as Trey spoke about second chances and the meaning of home. Mark Reynolds stood beside him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder as they listened to Trey's powerful words echo through the hushed room. The morning of the custody hearing dawned bright and clear. Darius Robinson stood before the courthouse mirror, adjusting his borrowed tie with trembling fingers. The navy suit, lent to him by Mr. Raj Patel, felt stiff and unfamiliar, but his eyes in the reflection showed quiet determination. Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches creaked as community members filed in. Sister Agnes clutched her rosary, while Mrs. Evelyn Brooks sat straight-backed and dignified in her Sunday best. Emily Reynolds helped Trey Robinson smooth down his carefully combed hair as he hugged his precious scrapbook. Judge Helen Whitfield's gavel echoed through the hushed chamber. Attorney Lisa Monroe rose confidently, her opening statement painting a vivid picture of redemption and family bonds. "Your Honor," Lisa began, her voice clear and measured, "this case is about more than custody. It's about second chances, about a man who has transformed his life to become the guardian these children desperately need." She methodically presented evidence of Darius's rehabilitation, certificates from anger management programs, letters from his employer, and testimonials from community members. Each document told part of a larger story of change and commitment. When Trey approached the judge's bench with his scrapbook, his small fingers trembled, but his voice remained steady. "This is from when Uncle Darius taught Elijah to hold his bottle," he explained, pointing to a carefully preserved photograph. "And here's where he fixed up our room, building the crib himself." Page after page revealed moments of their growing family bond, candid snapshots of Darius reading bedtime stories, handwritten notes about first words and small victories, drawings of their hoped-for future together. Prosecutor James Bennett rose next, his stern expression matching his sharp suit. "Mr. Robinson," he addressed Darius directly, "can you explain to the court why we should overlook your criminal record?" Darius met his gaze steadily. "I can't ask you to overlook it, sir. Those mistakes are part of who I was, but they taught me valuable lessons about consequences and responsibility. Every day, I choose to be better. For Trey, for Elijah, and for myself." When Mark Reynolds took the stand, his police uniform pressed and badge gleaming, his testimony carried particular weight. "I've watched Darius Robinson become the anchor these boys need," he stated firmly. "He's not just providing shelter, he's creating a home filled with love and stability." Judge Whitfield listened intently, her experienced eyes taking in not just the words, but the unspoken bonds evident in the courtroom. She observed how Trey instinctively looked to Darius for reassurance, how Darius gently cradled Elijah during breaks, how the community rallied around them with unwavering support. After a brief deliberation, she delivered her ruling. "The court has witnessed extraordinary evidence of rehabilitation, community support, and most importantly, genuine family bonds," she declared. "Mr. Robinson has demonstrated not only his commitment to personal growth but his dedication to providing a nurturing environment for these children. It is therefore the decision of this court to grant full custody of Trey and Elijah Robinson to their uncle, Darius Robinson." The courtroom erupted in muffled sobs and quiet cheers. Trey launched himself into Darius's arms, tears streaming down both their faces. Elijah, though too young to understand, cooed happily in response to their joy. Emily wiped away tears as she watched her father, Mark, smile broadly at the scene before them. One day, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Darius Robinson's new apartment, highlighting the freshly painted walls and clean carpets. The space, though modest by some standards, felt like a palace compared to their previous living conditions. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and even a small study area where Trey could do his homework. It was more than they had dared to hope for. Darius watched as Trey carefully arranged his books on a new shelf, each movement deliberate and precise. The boy had been different since the custody hearing, more relaxed, more like the child he should be. Elijah crawled on a clean playmat nearby, squealing with delight at his new surroundings. "Uncle Darius," Trey called out, holding up a museum brochure Emily had given him. "Emily says they have a whole room just about space and real dinosaur bones." His eyes sparkled with excitement, a sight that made Darius's heart swell. Emily Reynolds had become a constant presence in their lives, arriving 3 times a week with books, worksheets, and endless patience. She sat cross-legged on the floor with Trey, helping him catch up on months of missed schoolwork. More than just a tutor, she had become a friend, someone who understood what it meant to rebuild family bonds. "Dear Mom and Dad," Trey read aloud from the letter he was writing, his pencil moving carefully across the paper. "You won't believe our new apartment. I have my own desk now, and Elijah has a real crib. Uncle Darius is teaching me how to cook simple things, and I'm getting better grades in school thanks to Emily." Sarah Reynolds' news about their parents' case had brought fresh hope. The motion to reopen had been accepted, and she spoke confidently about procedural errors that could work in their favor. Trey had started counting days on a calendar, marking the date of the upcoming hearing with a bright red star. Outside, the neighborhood was transforming too. Mark Reynolds and Darius had turned an empty lot into a community gathering space, setting up picnic tables and string lights for their first neighborhood barbecue. The smell of grilling food drew people from their homes, breaking down barriers that had stood for years. Officer Jessica Martinez flipped burgers while chatting with Mrs. Evelyn Brooks about her famous potato salad recipe. Mr. Raj Patel's children played tag with other neighborhood kids, their laughter mixing with the sound of music from portable speakers. Sister Agnes moved from group to group, making introductions and sharing stories. Mark Reynolds stood back, watching the scene with satisfaction. He caught Darius's eye and nodded, both men understanding the significance of this moment. Other police officers, initially stiff in their uniforms, gradually relaxed as they shared meals and conversations with residents. "This is what community looks like," Mark said quietly to Emily, who had appeared at his side with a plate of food. She squeezed his hand, proud of how far her father had come from his days of cynicism and isolation. Trey helped serve lemonade, moving easily among the crowd. He no longer flinched when police officers approached, and even shared a joke with Officer Martinez about her cooking skills. Elijah, secure in Darius's arms, reached out to grab at the colorful streamers decorating the tables. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lot as children played, adults talked, and bridges were built. It wasn't just a barbecue. It was a celebration of second chances, of families both born and chosen, of a community coming together to support its own. The immigration courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah Reynolds straightened her papers at the counsel table. Trey Robinson sat between Darius and Mark Reynolds, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Elijah dozed peacefully in Darius's arms, unaware of the gravity of the moment. Judge Martinez studied the documents before her, her expression unreadable. Sarah had spent weeks building their case, uncovering procedural errors in the original deportation proceedings that violated due process rights. She presented her arguments with passionate precision, emphasizing how the Robinson children's well-being hinged on reuniting with their parents. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice clear and confident, "the initial deportation order failed to consider critical factors regarding the children's circumstances. Furthermore, the processing errors we've documented clearly demonstrate a violation of established protocols." Trey watched intently as Sarah presented photograph after photograph, document after document. His heart raced when she showed the judge his scrapbook, now part of the official evidence. The pages chronicled not just his struggle but the community's response, the support from Sister Agnes, the tutoring sessions with Emily, Darius's unwavering dedication. After what felt like hours, Judge Martinez looked up from her notes. "Having reviewed the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to overturn the previous deportation order." She continued with legal terminology that Trey didn't fully understand, but Sarah's smile told him everything he needed to know. "Michael and Angela Robinson will be granted provisional residency status, allowing them to return to the United States and reunite with their children," the judge concluded. Tears streamed down Trey's face as he hugged Darius, then Mark, then Sarah. "Thank you," he whispered repeatedly, his voice thick with emotion. Back at their apartment, the preparation for Michael and Angela's return became a community effort. Trey and Emily worked on welcome banners, spreading colorful paper across the living room floor. Darius taught Trey how to make his mother's favorite Filipino dessert, following a recipe card he'd kept all these years. Mark Reynolds stood in the doorway watching the scene unfold. He remembered the suspicious officer he'd been just months ago, viewing everything through a lens of cynicism. Now, helping this family had given him new purpose, healing not just their wounds but his own. Months later, the airport arrival area hummed with anticipation. Trey held Elijah, bouncing nervously on his toes as he watched the international arrivals gate. Darius adjusted the welcome sign they'd made, while Emily checked the flight status on her phone for the 10th time. When Michael and Angela finally appeared through the sliding doors, time seemed to stop. Trey handed Elijah to Emily and ran forward, colliding with his parents in a tearful embrace. Angela scooped up Elijah, covering his face with kisses while Michael held Trey close, murmuring words of love and pride. Darius hung back, watching the reunion with misty eyes. He felt Mark's hand rest on his shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. "You did good," Mark said quietly. "You kept them together until we could bring their parents home." The scene around them blurred with happy tears and laughter as the Robinson family held each other close, whole once again. Sarah wiped her eyes, professional composure momentarily forgotten as she witnessed the impact of her legal victory. Emily snapped photos, capturing the moment when months of hope and hard work finally paid off. The Robinson household buzzed with newfound energy as Michael and Angela settled back into their roles as parents. The small home, once a symbol of Trey's desperate struggle to care for Elijah, now rang with laughter and animated conversations. Angela spent hours in the kitchen recreating family recipes she'd missed sharing with her children, while Michael worked diligently to transform the spare room into a proper nursery for Elijah. Trey watched these changes with a mixture of joy and unease. While overjoyed to have his parents home, he found himself checking on Elijah more often than necessary, a habit born from months of being his brother's sole caregiver. Sometimes he'd wake up at night and tiptoe to Elijah's crib, just to make sure everything was okay. Darius noticed these moments, recognizing the complex emotions his nephew was processing. One evening, as he prepared to leave after dinner, Angela pulled him aside. "Darius," she said, her eyes filling with tears, "we can never repay you for what you've done for our boys." Michael joined them, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "We've been talking," he said, "and we want you to stay. Not just as an uncle who visits, but as part of our household. The boys need you, and frankly, so do we." Darius stood silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the offer. He glanced at Trey, who had paused his homework at the kitchen table, listening intently. "Are you sure?" Darius asked, his voice thick with emotion. "My apartment isn't far." "Your family," Michael interrupted firmly. "We have enough space, and together we can make this work. What happened to us? It showed us that family is everything, and you're part of that everything." Across town, Mark Reynolds sat with Emily at their favorite coffee shop, listening as she enthusiastically described her latest idea. "Dad, think about it," she said, spreading out sketches on the table. "A community mural that tells stories of second chances and coming together. We could feature the Robinson family's story, your story with me, Darius's journey." Mark studied the drawings, noting how his daughter's artistic talent had grown. "It's not just about art," Emily continued. "It's about showing people that change is possible, that communities can heal and grow stronger together." "Like how helping Trey helped me become a better father to you?" Mark asked softly. Emily reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Exactly. And look at us now, actually talking, sharing coffee, making plans together. That's worth celebrating, isn't it?" Back at the Robinson home, Darius sat on the floor with Elijah, watching as the baby stacked colorful blocks. Trey joined them, leaning against his uncle's shoulder. "Are you really going to stay?" he asked hopefully. "If you want me to," Darius replied, ruffling Trey's hair. "I do," Trey said firmly. "You're not just my uncle anymore. You're like another dad to us." Angela watched from the doorway as Michael began clearing space in the master bedroom closet. "We'll need to rearrange some things," he mused, "but we can make this work. Having Darius here, it feels right." Later that evening, Mark stopped by to check on the family, a habit he couldn't quite break. He found Darius on the front porch, taking a quiet moment to process the day's events. "Big changes," Mark observed, settling into the chair beside him. "Good changes," Darius replied, watching through the window as Trey helped Angela prepare dinner while Michael played with Elijah. "Never thought I'd have this, you know. A real family, a second chance." The community center hummed with creative energy as Emily Reynolds guided another workshop session. Residents gathered around tables covered in sketches and color swatches, each contributing their vision for the neighborhood mural. Emily moved between groups, offering encouragement and helping translate personal stories into visual elements. Trey Robinson sat at a corner table, his pencil moving swiftly across paper. His drawings captured moments from the past months: Elijah in his makeshift crib, Darius's protective embrace, and Mark's steady presence during difficult times. Emily noticed the emotional depth in his work and called her father over to take a look. "These are remarkable," Mark Reynolds said, studying Trey's sketches. The boy's talent was evident in every stroke, each drawing telling a powerful story. "You know, I have a friend who might be interested in seeing these." Within days, Mark arranged a meeting with Marcus Lee, a respected local artist known for his community-focused work. In his sun-filled studio, Marcus reviewed Trey's portfolio while the boy waited nervously. "You have something special here," Marcus said, pointing to a particularly moving sketch of his family's airport reunion. "Raw talent combined with real emotion. I'd be honored to mentor you." Trey's face lit up with excitement. "Really? You'd teach me?" Meanwhile, across town, Darius and Michael Robinson sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by business plans and budget spreadsheets. Their dream of opening an auto repair shop was taking shape. "With your mechanical expertise and my business background, we could really make this work," Michael said, reviewing the numbers. "The neighborhood needs affordable, honest service." Darius nodded, remembering how his skills had helped him rebuild his life. "We could even create apprenticeships, give young people a chance to learn a trade." The neighborhood buzzed with these new developments. The mural project brought people together, sharing stories and building connections. Emily's workshops became a gathering place for creativity and healing, while Trey's artistic journey inspired others to pursue their passions. In Marcus Lee's studio, Trey began learning proper techniques, his natural talent flourishing under professional guidance. Mark often stopped by to check on his progress, feeling proud of the boy's dedication and growth. "Your art tells stories that need to be heard," Marcus told Trey during one session, showing him how to blend colors effectively. "You're not just creating pictures, you're preserving memories and inspiring hope." The autumn sun cast a warm glow on the gathered crowd as they assembled in front of the covered mural. The once empty wall now held the community's collective story, waiting to be unveiled. Local news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the unprecedented turnout of residents, police officers, and city officials. Emily Reynolds adjusted the microphone stand on the makeshift stage while her father, Mark, helped arrange chairs for the elderly attendees. The transformation in their relationship was evident in their easy smiles and comfortable teamwork. As the ceremony began, Trey Robinson stood nervously behind the podium, his prepared speech clutched in his hands. His parents, Michael and Angela, sat in the front row with little Elijah, while Darius stood nearby giving his nephew an encouraging nod. "A few months ago," Trey began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I thought I was alone. I was just a kid trying to take care of my baby brother, scared of asking for help." He gestured toward the covered mural. "But this artwork shows what I learned, that no one has to face life's challenges alone." The audience listened intently as Trey described his journey, from hiding in shadows to finding strength in community support. He spoke about Darius's redemption, Mark's transformation from skeptic to advocate, and Emily's friendship that helped him discover his artistic voice. "Second chances aren't just about forgiveness," Trey continued, his eyes meeting Mark's. "They're about seeing the good in people, even when they can't see it themselves." As volunteers prepared to unveil the mural, Mark felt Emily's hand slip into his. She leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." Mark squeezed her hand, his heart full of gratitude for his own second chance at fatherhood. The mural was revealed to gasps of appreciation. Vibrant colors portrayed scenes of community life, children playing, neighbors helping neighbors, and families reuniting. At its center, a powerful image showed hands of different ages and colors joined together, forming a heart around the neighborhood. News reporters moved through the crowd, gathering reactions. Their cameras captured the genuine warmth and pride on faces that had once been guarded and suspicious. The neighborhood story was being rewritten, not through statistics or headlines, but through art and human connection. Trey concluded his speech by thanking everyone who had played a part in his family's journey. His parents beamed with pride, Angela wiping tears from her eyes as Michael held Elijah up to see his big brother on stage. Darius watched from the side, his own eyes glistening with emotion at how far they'd all come. The applause that followed wasn't just for Trey or the mural. It was a celebration of their collective journey from isolation to unity, from fear to trust, from broken to whole. In the days following the mural unveiling, the neighborhood buzzed with newfound energy. Local newspapers featured stories about the community's transformation, catching the attention of Victoria Chen, a prominent philanthropist and art patron. After reviewing Trey Robinson's portfolio and hearing his story, she offered him a full scholarship to the prestigious Hamilton Art Academy. Trey sat at his family's kitchen table, staring at the acceptance letter while his mentor, Marcus Lee, explained the opportunity. "This could open doors you never imagined," Marcus said, pointing out the Academy's world-class facilities and renowned instructors. However, Trey's eyes drifted to the window where he could see Elijah playing in the yard. "I don't know if I can leave them," he admitted quietly. "We just got back together." Across town, the grand opening of Robinson & Robinson Auto Repair drew a steady stream of customers. Darius and Michael worked side by side beneath the hood of a sedan, their matching work shirts emblazoned with their new logo. They had already hired 3 local teenagers as apprentices, teaching them the trade after school hours. "Watch carefully," Darius instructed one of the young apprentices, demonstrating proper diagnostic techniques. "This isn't just about fixing cars. It's about building trust with people who depend on us." At the police station, Mark Reynolds settled into his new office as Community Liaison Officer. The walls, once bare, now displayed photos from various neighborhood events. Officer Jessica Martinez sat across from him, reviewing their latest initiative. "The youth mentorship program is already showing results," Jessica reported, spreading out statistics on his desk. "Incident reports are down 30% since we started the basketball league." Mark nodded, remembering how far they'd come from his days of cynical patrols. "We need to expand the program," he said. "Maybe partner with Robinson & Robinson for a vocational training track." Emily stopped by her father's office regularly, helping to organize community events. She watched with pride as he transformed from a disillusioned officer into someone the neighborhood kids looked up to. Back at home, Trey spread his art supplies across the living room floor, working on a new piece while considering his options. The scholarship offered incredible opportunities, but the thought of leaving his newly reunited family and supportive community weighed heavily on his mind. Elijah toddled over, picking up a crayon and attempting to contribute to his brother's artwork. "You know we support whatever you decide," Angela said softly, watching her sons from the doorway. "Your father and I want you to chase your dreams, even if that means being away for a while." The auto repair shop's success exceeded expectations, becoming more than just a business. It served as a gathering place where neighbors could count on honest work and fair prices. Michael and Darius's partnership proved that second chances and family bonds could create something meaningful for the entire community. One evening, Trey sat on the front porch steps of their home, sketching absently in his notebook. Darius joined him, settling down with a cup of coffee in his work-stained hands. "You're thinking about the scholarship, aren't you?" Darius asked, noticing his nephew's distracted expression. Trey nodded slowly. "I want to go, but everything we've been through to be together. It feels wrong to leave now." "Listen," Darius said, placing a gentle hand on Trey's shoulder. "Family isn't about being in the same place. It's about supporting each other's dreams. We'll always be here for you." The next day, Trey visited Mark at the police station. The officer's office walls were covered with community photos, including the recent mural unveiling. "You know," Mark said, leaning back in his chair, "I had a chance to join a special task force years ago. I turned it down because I was afraid of change. That decision haunted me for years. Don't let fear hold you back, Trey." As they discussed the opportunity, Emily burst into the office with excitement. "I have an idea," she exclaimed. "The art school is only 10 minutes from my college. We could be roommates." Trey's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Really? You'd want to live with me?" "Of course," Emily replied. "We could support each other and you wouldn't be alone in a new city." The community center buzzed with activity as residents gathered to celebrate Trey's acceptance. Colorful banners hung from the walls, and tables overflowed with home-cooked dishes. Little Elijah toddled around wearing a t-shirt that read, "My brother's biggest fan." Sister Agnes hugged Trey tightly. "We're all so proud of you," she said, wiping away tears. Mr. Raj Patel presented Trey with a care package of his favorite snacks. "For when you're studying late," he explained with a warm smile. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks brought a handmade quilt. "To remind you of home," she said softly. Michael and Angela watched their son with pride as he moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Angela squeezed her husband's hand, both of them grateful for the incredible support system their family had found. "Our boy is growing up," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Trey stood before the gathering, clutching Emily's hand for support. "Thank you all for believing in me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "With Emily by my side and all of you behind me, I know I can do this." 6 months into art school, Trey Robinson's talent flourished beyond expectation. His professors praised the raw emotion captured in his paintings, particularly a series depicting children caring for one another in challenging circumstances. Between classes, he and Emily Reynolds settled into a comfortable routine in their shared apartment, their friendship growing stronger each day. "Your latest piece is incredible," Emily said one evening, watching Trey add finishing touches to a canvas showing 2 brothers holding hands against a stormy backdrop. "It's like you're telling our whole story through art." Back in the neighborhood, the auto repair shop that Darius and Michael Robinson started had become a cornerstone of the community. They'd hired 3 local teenagers as apprentices, teaching them valuable skills while keeping them off the streets. Mark Reynolds' community policing programs showed remarkable results. Crime rates dropped by 30%, and other precincts began studying their model. The neighborhood mural attracted regular visitors, with tour groups often stopping to admire the powerful imagery and hear the story behind it. When Trey's first solo exhibition opened at the City Gallery, the space quickly filled with familiar faces. Sister Agnes dabbed tears from her eyes as she studied a painting of hands passing bread across a soup kitchen counter. Mr. Raj Patel beamed with pride at a piece showing his store's warmly lit window on a dark night. During Trey's speech, movement near the entrance caught his eye. Marcus "Slim" Johnson stood uncertainly in the doorway, wearing a clean button-down shirt and tie. After the applause died down, Slim approached Trey and Darius. "Your art, it shows what I've been missing," Slim said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been watching how everything's changed, how everyone's come together. I want to be part of that. I want to do better." Darius placed a hand on Slim's shoulder. "Everyone deserves a second chance. We know that better than most." The block party that followed buzzed with joy and music. Mark twirled Emily on the makeshift dance floor while Officer Jessica Martinez taught Elijah some salsa steps. Angela Robinson served her famous empanadas as Michael and Darius discussed plans to expand the auto shop's apprenticeship program. Trey stood back watching his family, both blood and chosen, celebrate together. The sight of Slim helping Mrs. Evelyn Brooks carry chairs, eager to contribute, brought a smile to his face. If you enjoyed the story of Officer Mark and Trey, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.